The intro always putting him in a good mood. Captain Carey Rich back in for Bill Gunter this morning. So that means you're going to take over his role and you and Jen can battle, right?
Oh, man, I'm afraid to battle Jen. Mm-hmm. She seems to be pretty quick at the tongue, so I'm going to refrain from battling her. But I'll tell you one thing, great sound bites, and she has a terrific taste for music.
Mm-hmm. You like the flattery already?
I'm completely good with that.
We very rarely start the show with Jen in a good giggling mood. Well done, Carey. Some would say you've done the impossible.
Hey.
Okay.
I'm
Maybe
usually, pretty nice. Just watch out. I could take it out on you now.
I don't like how this dynamic is shifting at all. Fortunately, Bill will be back tomorrow, and everything will be back to normal. Welcome into the Tuesday morning edition of the Early Game. I'm Tim Hill. Interesting basketball news going down yesterday. I guess USC women's basketball getting a late flip in a Charleston post player from the Charleston area that had been committed to Western Kentucky. Her name is Elisa Weslek. So she's now coming to Dawn Staley's program where they're going to try to fill the enormous holes, the enormous shoes that Asia Wilson leaves. And that will be an entire process, and obviously one person will not be able to do that. But on the men's side of things, Carey, a little bit after noon yesterday, it became official. David Beatty will not be back with the program. He was the highest-ranked recruit coming in the last year in a freshman class. That was a large one. I think they had 5 guys last year. Mm-hmm. He joins a couple of other guys, one other freshman in Ibrahim Dubia, who does not return, and then I guess Kadeem Gee was going to come back for his junior season or would have been a junior. So 3 guys who could have returned to the program who will not be back with Frank Martin and company. What do you make of the news?
Not surprised. I call it attrition. Saw it as kind of knew it was coming, and it happens. There's going to be attrition every single year, whether it's football, basketball, or baseball. There's going to always be some action, some attrition, some transfers, some movements at the end of the year. But David Beatty, I saw his comments, and just simply stated, he said while he enjoyed his time here at South Carolina, he just didn't feel like it was a good fit. And you often hear me talk about when it comes to recruiting, there has to be what we call compatibility. Means 2 parts, 2 pieces got to go together. And for whatever reason, those 2 pieces did not go together. And because of that, there was a parting of the ways between David Beatty and the South Carolina men's basketball program. You
mentioned you could see it coming. You have a guy who comes in as a 4-star guy. Take that for what it's worth, obviously, but a pretty highly thought of, highly touted guy, and doesn't score in the last 11 games of the Carolina season and clearly was down the rotation. Defense, the big issue with Beatty, that never really figured out or never could execute what Frank Martin was asking him to do on the defensive end. And that's, we were talking about it yesterday. You go to Brad Brownell at Clemson, you go to most high-level basketball coaches, that's what you have to do first. Excuse me, I remember Eddie Fogler talking about Jamel Bradley back in the day, and he had gotten to the point where the questions had just frustrated him. He's like, what do you want me to tell you? That he hurts us on the defensive end? He does. But he can shoot it. And so
Coach Fogler said that?
Oh, yeah. In the public press conference. He finally got to the point. He's like, come on, what do you want from me? This is the deal, okay?
My coach said that?
Absolutely said that. Because that's where it had gotten with him. And I think maybe the frustration for him, too, is that he had realized that he had to give up that to get that. He had to give up the defense and to get the offense. And that's a constant, I think, balance that coaches have to deal with. And the problem with David Beatty, the main problem with that is that his offense never even got close to being the plus to make up for a minus on the defensive end. It was apparent to us because he didn't earn a bunch of playing time. I remember the Temple game early on was clearly a game that he had circled, and he was a Philadelphia native, and he was ultra aggressive and scored some points. Outside of that, there wasn't much in the way of production or an example of the reason that he got the recruiting hype, I think, that we read about of him coming in.
Well, in fairness to Beatty, as a freshman, that transition is going to be difficult for 95, 96% of the freshmen that are out there. Again, I talked about it yesterday, which is why the transfer market has become the most attractive market for college coaches because they prefer young men with experience. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to recruit high school kids. Obviously, as a part of it. And some guys are going to get it quicker than others, but it helps the learning curve. And as a freshman, it's so hard to make that transition. And every coach has an identity. You talked about Fogel. Coach Fogel, I'm surprised that I guess a part of me may be surprised, but the other part of me isn't surprised that he would say that because he was classic in press conferences. I'm telling you, I used to be in some of those press conferences and would feel sorry for the media folks who asked him questions, and he would just slice them up, man, and I would feel sorry for those guys. So one side of me is a little bit surprised, the other maybe not. But every coach has an identity, and I think we all know what Frank Martin's identity is. I think we all know the one part of his game, the one part of that team's identity that he won't compromise, and that's playing defense. We saw a McDonald's All-American, a Columbia native, a South Carolina native that could have gone anywhere in the country, come to South Carolina, and because he struggled to make that transition playing defense early on, I played 20-plus minutes a game as a McDonald's All-American at South Carolina. There were so many folks around saying, man, you could have gone anywhere, and, why do you go to South Carolina? They haven't won. You could have gone to a winning program in P.J. Dozier. Well, you know what? Frank Martin wasn't budging. He wasn't compromising that part of the game. You're going to defend. You're going to learn to defend. You're going to do it in a way that's not counterproductive for our team. You're going to do it in a way to where it's not detrimental to our team. And we need you on the floor. But if you can't do it this way, then you're going to sit over here with me. So if he does that to a P.J. Dozier, a McDonald's All-American, then 9 times out of 10, every other freshman is probably going to be subjected to that. But, again, in fairness to freshmen, it is a hard transition. Social media has made everything associated with college athletics, the lights that much brighter. And sometimes we lose focus on the small things that are so important. Because we live in that microwave society, because we live in that drive-through society, we want it right away. And, having an opportunity to develop over a 2-3 year period is no longer the popular thing to do. If you haven't done it in 2 or 3 years, in 2 years, then you're deemed as a failure, which is why the transfer rate is so high. When guys outside of the grad transfer market, obviously they've worked hard enough to graduate and provide themselves with another opportunity after the primary school. But a lot of youngsters are transferring because they're not able to attain that instant success. I remember when I was coming through, the plan was outside of those top 20, top 30, top 40 kids, play a little bit as a freshman, increase that role just a little bit as a sophomore, and by your junior year, your goal was to start your junior and senior years. That was the ideal model back then. That's no longer the case. If you don't go in and get a taste of that instant success in year number 1, now all of the folks outside of, the coaching staff here or at the respective college program, those guys are telling you, man, you can go elsewhere. This coach is calling me. You can go this school, and you're guaranteed to play 25 minutes a game. And that's what happened. Gets the ball rolling, and because you haven't had that success, you're not anchored the right way. You're not anchored in confidence. You're not anchored in being encouraged that if I work hard based on the experience that I had as a freshman, if I work harder this offseason, now it gives me an opportunity to play just a little bit more. That's no longer the case, and that's why the transfer rate, the number of transfers are so high right now when it comes to high-level college basketball.
Well, I don't think you can ignore the NBA draft and the shift, the dramatic shift we've seen there, and the lack of seniors who get drafted in that thing every single year. I think that might have sped up the process for a lot of guys, and
yes,
maybe they feel like the clock is ticking much more on their professional career as well than it was back in the day. We're just getting started this morning. He's the Captain Carey Rich. Plenty to get to when it comes to basketball, Frank Martin's program. Now, David Beatty's news yesterday, you mentioned you could see that coming, and it's been the trend, I think, especially around college football, but around college basketball, but for the Frank Martin program as well. We've seen it happen with notable guys coming in, just don't fit, don't work out for whatever reason, and year after year, you mentioned the attrition. That's what it is. It's become pretty commonplace. We'll continue to talk about that and how that affects things now moving forward for the Gamecock basketball program. Get into some NBA news from last night. Golden State winning at home. We got a road winner. Philadelphia losing for the first time in a while that you might have heard it in the national update. The Miami Heat, Bill Gunter's Miami Heat, a big winner last night. So we're glad that Bill's not here to pretend to be a Miami Heat fan and take all the credit for it. This is really weird. I'm sitting here getting ready for the second segment of the program, and my co-host is furiously writing things down. Looks like he's working over there, Jen.
Okay, I'm not used to seeing that in that particular chair.
There's no donut being consumed?
No.
No coffee being complained about?
Mm-mm. Not even fiddling on his phone.
It was really
Bill
weird.
couldn't be that bad every morning. He's subjected to a lot of scrutiny. He couldn't be that bad every morning, right?
So what are you writing now?
Where's the crickets when you need them?
I'm telling you.
You're writing stuff down. It looks like you're furiously researching. I'm guessing this is about basketball recently, our current topic?
Actually not.
Okay. What do you got? Anything
Grocery
good?
list.
I'm actually
That's
big
not-
on,
that would make
normally, if I were not in studio with me, I'd be up reading. I'm big on motivational quotes. And I look for something to get me going
Okay.
every single morning.
Gotcha. So you're saying Jen and I have already dragged you down, and you needed something to lift you back up.
You guys have added to
Okay.
my day. Actually.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Anytime.
Let's see what RJ can bring to the program this morning. Love Chevrolet phone lines, 803-404-6100. The news coming out yesterday, a little bit afternoon, David Beatty announced he will not be back with the Gamecock basketball program after 1 year. Came in as a four-star recruit out of the Philadelphia area. From a guard perspective, guard was a big issue for the Gamecocks last year, and Beatty did not get a bunch of playing time and ended up going scoreless in the last 11 games, so he's going to move on in his college basketball career. RJ, you know this has been a trend as of late, not just in South Carolina, but around college basketball. What do you think?
Well, first of all, good morning, Jay. How are y'all doing? One of the reasons, Corey, that the attrition's so bad across the country is because of, Coach Martin's program. I mean, he's put a lot of people out in that transfer market. It seems like he's had more people leave the program, due to their own fault or just leaving transfer than he's had people graduate. I mean, it is an epidemic of people leaving there. You remember the day that Beatty came in, he put a text out, "We just got better." Now, I understand, Corey, it's very difficult. Frank Martin's a very difficult coach to play for. He's very demanding. I know that. But it would seem like you better get some guys in there that's going to be a part of your program and a part of what kind of coach he is. You need to go out and recruit the type of guy that's going to be able to take his coaching, and I'm not sure he's doing that. And I know kids today aren't, Corey, they're a hell of a lot they're not as tough as you are, I know. And but don't you have to recruit the type of guy or go out and find the type of guy that's going to receive his type of coaching? Because I think that has a lot to do with it. He's always screaming and he's always in your face, and that's the type of people that we see. And I know he's the fatherly figure away and the coach away from that we don't see. But, he's a hard coach, and I think it's starting to look very bad for the program with as many transfers they've had, Corey. And you can't deny there's been a lot.
I think he's talking to you, Carey.
Not Corey.
Well, depends. Maiden name.
Hey, you know what? Yeah, you make very solid points. But in fairness, you noted that Coach Martin puts players out of the program. I don't think that's fair because whenever there's a transfer, all you need to do is just look at the number of transfers that we've seen over the years across the country. Whenever there's a transfer, for the most part, whenever a kid decides to transfer, for the most part, obviously there will always be an exception, it is often mutually agreed on. It's often thought about or thought that it's going to be best for all parties involved if a particular young man goes in a different direction for the sake of him and for the sake of the program. Now, is that to suggest that Coach Martin and his staff haven't missed on a few? Absolutely. They're not exempt from missing on a few prospects, just like every other college coach in America, whether it's football, basketball, or baseball. You're not going to get every last one of them. You expend a lot of resources, time, evaluation, assessment, what have you, to try to make sure you're recruiting to your style. You're going to constantly hear me talk and use the word compatibility. That's what recruiting is about. You got to recruit to your style. You got to recruit to who fits what you want from a player in your program. So, yes, have they missed on a few? In fairness, yes, they have missed on a few, but so have so many other coaches throughout college basketball. And you made mention of the fact that Coach Martin is a hard coach to play for. Coach Martin is very demanding. Yes, he's very demanding. But if you're going to talk about the yelling and screaming, then I think it's also important. To replay or offer the depiction of those guys getting to the Final Four and all of those players that he was very demanding with from the start. All of those guys, you saw several pictures of those guys hugging and embracing and talking about how much Coach Martin's demanding style helped them get to where they were and how they are all forever indebted to how he impacted their lives. So I think we got to be fair. If we're going to bring up the what we see on the sideline, and what we see on the sideline is what we see. We all are watching the same movie, okay? But I think, to be fair, you also got to talk about the other side, and that's what I want to make sure we're clear on.
From the outside, I think we do a poor job, or we certainly can over-dramatize coaches' sidelines demeanors.
Yes.
Because you, as a former Division I basketball player, I think you know it better than most of us, all college basketball coaches on a high level are extremely demanding. It's how they choose to display this, I think, is how they get their public reputations, right? Mm-hmm. Frank Martin is obviously as transparent.
His style is
the best
different.
Way to do that.
Yeah, his style is different.
As public in his display of this being demanding as any coach across the country, right? But
from the surface,
right? Mm-hmm. I'm saying we see it,
right?
Well, we see it, examples of it multiple times every game, and we probably saw it more this past season than we have seen in recent memory, just because of the frustration, the inexperience, everything that was on display, the lack of leadership that he continued to harp on, that he felt like he needed to do that for his team. The year before, we didn't see nearly as much of that because other guys took care of it for him.
Well, something we talked about yesterday, leadership from within.
Sure. And he's talked about that multiple times.
Sure.
But I think what RJ's saying is how much, or what we're trying to figure out now, how much does a coaching staff, how much responsibility does a coaching staff have to take when these things don't work out with a guy, when the fit is not right? Will Muschamp talks about that a lot in the recruiting process, and it's one of the reasons he takes a bunch of pride, I think, in offering guys for the first time, because he thinks he can identify a fit or his kind of guy quicker than a lot of other maybe a lot of other evaluators, or certainly a lot of other head coaches. So it comes down to that. I think the obvious question is, if David Beatty didn't work out after a year, what was missing in the recruiting process that did not alert the staff that maybe this possibly wasn't going to work out? And on the flip side of that, let's talk about the guys who have worked out. So I think it was a 5-person freshman class that came in last year, and you got 3 of those guys who were pretty solid contributors down the stretch. And the big men, Felipe Haase, Jason Cudd, works his way into the rotation late in the season. And then you had Justin Minaya, who you could argue was one of, if not the outside of Chris Silva, the most valuable player on the team last year. So you had 3 of the 5 working out. 2 did not and have moved on after a year. what is it in the process that can speak to a coach, an evaluator that says, hey, this is our guy, this is not our guy. And then sometimes I imagine you think you hit those benchmarks, and then when you get a guy on campus, you realize maybe you misevaluated in certain instances. I'll let you give the details as we continue to roll on this morning, but again, this is what's going on here, and that's obviously what we focus on in the home of the Gamecocks, but these are issues for college basketball programs all over the place, and year in and year out, it's across big boy college athletics. You mentioned attrition. People leave, people come in. That's the way of the world. In college basketball, though, it seems to have really gone to another level these days. Well played, Jonathan. Via the Shepherd's Glass inbox off of RJ's call in the last segment. Jonathan says, Jay and Corey, talk to any player that is stuck with Frank Martin. They would run through a brick wall for that guy. Someone was listening very closely.
Corey?
And I'm Jay. Yeah. So before the break, asked you the news coming out yesterday. David Beatty makes it 3 guys now transferring out of the program. A couple of other guys, 2 freshmen now, and one guy who would have returned as a junior, two guys who would return as a sophomore. So I guess 3 years combined. These guys have been in the program 1 year and then 2 years for Kadeem Gee, Ibrahim Doumbia, and then David Beatty added to that. So where do you put the blame, if that's the right way to put it? How does this happen, I guess, is the question. And where do you think South Carolina ranks among other big boy college basketball programs right now in the rate of this happening?
Well, I don't think that would – well, I would not be able to answer where they rank when it comes to the attrition and the number of players that are transferring out of the program every year, because I don't follow other programs as closely as I follow South Carolina. And to offer that type of assessment, I think would obviously need to be skewed just because I don't follow the other programs as closely as I follow South Carolina. But let me just say this. Recruiting is not a perfect science. Some don't like me to use this as an example, but I've often said that recruiting is nothing more than a crapshoot. You either get lucky sevens or you crap all the way out. And unfortunately, you don't normally find out until that young man gets on campus or that young lady gets on campus. To take it a step further, there have been so many comparisons when you talk about today's student athlete compared to yesteryear's athlete. Kids are different. That's just the reality. My son, as much as I'd like to think he's going to play hard, he's not going to. His approach isn't going to be the same approach I played with. And it's simple. My environment forced me to play a certain way. My environment forced me to play with a certain toughness or a certain fight that offered me no other way out. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If I didn't play and if I didn't fight, if I didn't do anything I needed to do in my neighborhood, and basketball just happened to be the ticket, if I didn't play that way and that way transferred to how I ultimately played at C.A. Johnson at the University of South Carolina, then it was going to be different. My son is not growing up the way I grew up. He won't grow up the way that I grew up. So his approach is going to be a little bit different. There has to be more of a concerted effort for him. There has to be a more deliberate, a more intentional effort for him. Well, it wasn't for me. I did it through osmosis. I did it through the way I lived. I did it through, it became second nature. And I remember someone asking me, Carey, why do you play hard? And I was dumbfounded by the question. Someone said, Carey, why did you play so hard? And I was dumbfounded by the question. Well, unknowingly, I said, I didn't have a choice. Is there any other way to play? Well, that was a result of my environment. Most kids, a lot of the kids, are not growing up in that same environment. So, again, if you're not going to make that concerted effort to put yourself in position to be recruited by programs, and I'm not even going to say high-level programs because, only 10% of the prospects are going to play high-level basketball. Only 10% of the folks that are out there are going to play high-level basketball when you talk about prospects. So recruiting is not a perfect science. But what I will also say is you talked about, how demanding Coach Martin is. 3 of the most demanding coaches. Now, we don't know about it on the surface because you're not as close to those guys, and you don't see them every day. And because they won, they have some equity in place that allows them to not be as scrutinized as a Frank Martin. Bill Self, one of the toughest coaches to play for in the country. Bill Self has won at a really, really high clip at Kansas. Krzyzewski is known all throughout college basketball, one of the toughest coaches to play for. He's won, so people don't talk about it. Rick Pitino, say what you want to say about his off-the-court behavior. I'll never try to defend that, but one of the best coaches to ever coach, one of the toughest coaches to ever play for. But because they've won at a high clip, they're not as magnified. Their behavior, their coaching style is not as microscopic. So I get that part. But, again, we all are watching Frank on the sideline, and Frank is who he is. He doesn't apologize for that, and I'm not going to apologize for that. His style is his style. It's important for him to recruit, which they've done that for the most part. And also I think the number is heightened just a little bit when you talk about the transfers. Last year he eventually lost like the entire class with the whole the BB gun incident. Mm-hmm. I don't think any of those guys without that incident would have transferred. But it happened. It's not an excuse. But that number elevated the number of transfers that have come through Frank over the last couple of years. Without that BB gun incident, I don't think those guys transfer. But they did. So obviously they become a part. They become a variable in the equation. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it is. And in terms of who takes the blame when it comes to recruiting and being able to identify guys that are compatible, the coaching staff has to own it, just like every coaching staff has to own it. But because recruiting is not a perfect science, then I think it's inexact. I don't know how to describe it other than it's a crapshoot. You don't know how good a kid or how quickly a kid is going to transition, and the basketball part is just a small part of it. The other things are normally the determining factors that help you understand whether a young man is going to transition or a young lady is going to transition to this level. So
as you were talking, it dawned on me then, I think it's a bit of a balancing act when you're recruiting, that you have to check off a number of boxes, right? Mm-hmm. But very rarely is your list going to check off all those boxes and that guy's going to decide to go to your school.
Unless you're Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, Syracuse, North Carolina, the Blue Bloods. Mm-hmm. With those guys, it's just a tad bit different. They recruit from a different pool.
Right. So when you're recruiting at the University of South Carolina, you have those boxes.
Yes.
And then I think you have other, if not red flags, you have some issues on the other side of things that you say, all right, we have to have enough of the boxes to outweigh the issues, and then sometimes you just gotta roll the dice a little bit more on some guys than other guys. Would you agree?
Yes. Well, but let's be clear, and I really want you to understand that just because a kid transfers, that doesn't mean that there are issues in place.
Well, it means there are issues.
Well,
whether they're basketball issues or off the floor issues, it means it didn't work out.
Yeah, it didn't work out, not being a good fit. But I think with what we're talking about, the issues connote that something bad happened.
No, I'm not saying that at all. You brought up the off the floor incidents from the class a couple of classes ago.
Right.
There, as far as we know anyway, there haven't been any of those issues in this season, and there are 4 guys who could have come back to the program who are not coming back to the program. Corey Holden being the other one. He's going out as a grad transfer now.
Sure.
That's a pretty high number, 4.
It is a pretty high number.
And it seems to be happening every single year.
It's nowhere around the number.
That's what RJ was saying.
It's nowhere around the number. The number is what it is. Again, we all are watching the same movie. And ideally, you don't want that high of a number.
Sure.
But it happened. And from a compatibility standpoint, you got to find a way to make sure or do whatever you need to do to make sure that number isn't as high. Ideal is not low enough. When you got 4 guys transferring, and it happens every other year. It happens across the country, but when it happens in your backyard, you pay closer attention to it. And I can't defend it. Neither will I try to defend it. We all are seeing the same thing, but do know that it is an inexact science. It's not perfect, and you're hopeful that you are able to get it right as a staff. You're hopeful that you are able to get it right when it comes to guys fitting what you want to happen or what you need to happen for your program to be successful. But with the number of guys that have transferred the last couple of years, I can understand why, even though I may know the story beneath the surface, I can understand why from the surface fans would be a little bit troubled or concerned with the number of players that are transferring out.